Lords, I thank the Noble Lord Foster of Bath for securing this debate and for his superb introduction. And I would agree with every word he said about the government's ideologically driven, utterly nonsensical proposed sale of Channel 4. And I'd also echo the comments from the Labour lady, Baroness Benjamin, on that point and the importance of that. I would join everyone else in welcoming the Minister, Noble Lord the Minister, back. However, aware of not setting forth that carousel, ministerial carousel to which the Noble Viscount Stangate referred, I won't do that, just in case, because it might not do him any good. But I want to go back to Tuesday, when I had an oral question, which was actually about the teaching of philosophy through our education system. And my supplementary question was about, would this not help to improve the quality of public debate, the state of this public sphere? And it's interesting that I actually got, I'm pretty sure, the loudest intimations of support from every corner of your Lordship's house that I have ever enjoyed when I placed that question. And I think we know that the quality of our public discourse, the quality of our political debate needs to be much better, but it could be much worse, as the Noble Lord Dubs said, pointing to the situation of Fox News in the United States. And so I think my answer to the Noble Lord Gilbert, who said the government had to answer the question of what is public service broadcasting for, it's there to ensure that there is a clear, funded voice expressing ideas, creativity, allowing the public to speak for the public good, not voices that are driven entirely by private profit and by private interests. Because who owns the private broadcasters is something I'll come back to. Now, to be fair, I have to acknowledge that I've sometimes been a critic, particularly of the BBC, when we're talking about public sector broadcasters myself. And if the Noble Lord Gilbert thinks that the BBC is too liberal, I really would invite him to consider the relative level of appearances of Green Party representatives on Question Time compared to UKIP, Brexit Party and their ilk. The maths really is quite astonishing. However, what we've seen is a BBC that's been very often small c conservative. It kept giving a platform to climate change deniers long after most other international media outlets had given that up and were astonished that the BBC was still doing so. And I note only this week a story in the New Statesman looking at the BBC's economic coverage and criticism from economists concerned that the national budget, like a household budget analogy, is utterly false and utterly misleading the public. But I speak as a former newspaper editor, and I know that editors have enormous pressures on them. And a number of other Noble Lords have referred to the enormous pressures which we've seen placed on the BBC in recent years. And those pressures have come from those right-wing, profit-driven commercial forces, the media tycoons, to which I referred earlier, who have their commercial interests in squashing the BBC. And, of course, they also have their political interests. And what we've seen in recent years is their voices have been sadly backed by the government. Indeed, they've often seen to be joint voices, the two working together to attack the BBC and our other public service broadcasters. And so it's crucial that there is an alternative voice there saying we want a genuinely critical BBC that does acknowledge there's lots of different voices and approaches. And particularly on that basis, a number of Noble Lords have referred to the importance of local media outlets. And I think local BBC radio in particular is absolutely crucial. It's something I appear on quite often because I travel around the country a lot. And it is so valued by local communities, particularly in a time of crisis. And of course, we are seeing so many crises now. What I would like to see is thinking about how we can actually fund more local public sector broadcasting, more local public sector media. Because, of course, when we talk about broadcasting now, the reality is, of course, that everything's merged together. Very often you get what's called broadcasting, what used to be called newspapers, social media. People get through the one device, and they don't necessarily make much distinction between them. And on those lines, I think I've got to come back to that issue about ownership and voices. And I note that the latest Media Reform Coalition report from 2021 pointed out that 90% of national newspaper circulation is now owned by 3 companies. These are voices that are competing with the broadcasters. The DMG Media, owned by Daily Media and General Trust, has 38% of weekly newspaper circulation, News UK 32%. What we need is balance. And there's one final point I want to make here is, speaking as someone who actually has a degree in communication studies, we've got to start thinking also about all of this as an interactive process. We're talking about broadcasting, we're talking about audiences sitting there and receiving the content. We need to think much more about content created by individuals who now have technology available to them, broadcasters picking up some of that content, sharing it round. And perhaps I should declare an interest here, as I think I'm probably one of the few members of Your Lordship's House with a TikTok account. I'd be interested to know who else has one. I'll follow you. But we've got to think from the perspective of young people today, is we need to make sure they have a voice both on mainstream sources like public sector broadcasting. We have to make sure that they are not drowned out by a few loud media tycoon, inevitably right-wing voices.